Great. Okay. So I see some people are still joining. So what you might do is you might start this webinar today. My name is Trevor Townsend. I'm co-founder at Payzaar, and delighted to be joined by people with an interest in our topic. The topic is using payroll data to extend influence in the organization. There's a lot of, I suppose, chatter out there about payroll gaining a seat at the table, and I think what we might have in store today are some words from someone that is using data in a very pragmatic way to extend their influence in the organization. And there may be some practical tips about how do we become more influential so that we turn that aspiration of claiming a seat into a reality where people from within the organization, from within the HR payroll domains, understand where the value is to be gained from payroll and how you can put yourself into that position to be far more influential. So we're joined for this discussion today by someone who's built a career improving HR and payroll processes, lectures on topics of global payroll and UK payroll legislation, and lots of experience and hopefully some practical tips for everybody and some examples maybe that people will be able to take away from today when thinking about what they're doing in their organization to help drive their career and improve the lot of the payroll professional. Just a couple of housekeeping tips along the way. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A button at the bottom. You'll see that. So we'll keep an eye on on your questions as they come, and happy to take those as they come in. We're also recording this webinar today, so if you have any colleagues who might be interested in this topic, feel free to share this once we share it with you, just in case they couldn't miss it. So what I'd like to do is introduce you to Stuart Hough. Stuart has been working in the payroll industry for a long time. So over to you, Stuart. You might introduce yourself, please.
Hey everyone, thanks for the introduction, Trevor. As Trevor said, my name's Stuart. I'm currently Global Payroll Manager for Blue Prism in the UK, where we kind of run payrolls we cover 23 countries. I've been here for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I've had kind of previous payroll experience for the last 19-20 years, working in both the public and private sector. So hopefully I've had a lot of experience and some ups and downs during my payroll career. So, yeah, let's see what I can kind of add to the conversation today, I guess.
Super. Thanks, Stuart. Well, listen, let's jump straight in. I have a couple of questions for you. One of the things that strikes me about your career today, Stuart, is the focus on process improvement in HR and payroll. Can you tell me about some of the common issues you find and some things that you've really focused on over the last number of years in your career?
Sure. I mean, I guess even from the outset, even prior to joining payroll or working even in an office environment, I was kind of aware of like a constant trend across places that had worked of kind of process improvement and efficiencies and eliminating waste. And I remember kind of thinking and being surprised that people were, I guess, performing tasks the way they did and actually wondering why certain elements of tasks couldn't be automated, for example. And you find that people just kind of go along and seem to accept the process despite there being kind of glaring inefficiencies. You know, and I guess this thought process followed me through to when I joined my first payroll role. And very quickly there again, I was kind of witnessing manual and time-consuming tasks in preparing payroll. I had this colleague, kind of a close colleague of mine. He had these like 2 black books sat on his desk, and kind of, you know, what you actually doing with them. And he was like handwriting every kind of starter details in when somebody joined, just so he had a close record of them to hand. And we had guys there who were kind of like, there's this one guy who kind of just spent all day kind of opening the payroll post and sorting it into alphabetical order. Training was conducted where you kind of wrote your own notes as you were going along. People were printing reports out left, right, center. So there was a lot of kind of manual stuff kind of happening. And it just seemed crazy how much kind of effort was required, you know, for people to kind of perform these tasks, and why they weren't kind of considering the automation. I mean, even bearing in mind kind of like software tools like Excel or something that's kind of been around for 30 plus years. And you see this similar trend, and I've seen a similar trend, I guess, in every role since. So overcomplicated, poor manual processes and repetition, I guess, across all organizations I've worked in. So, and a lot of these payroll complications kind of arise from the initial data that is kind of submitted into the team. So whether that failing of that kind of, or that complication is kind of derived from the data format, the data quality, the kind of delay to getting that information, down to the transmission method, and so on and so on. And I do think, and I think I've seen across the years, that companies are getting, no doubt getting better at how processes are performed, and there's better and more innovative products coming available to simplify these tasks. But if there's a lack of understanding of the true capability of the product they're using, or poor implementation, or no lead to drive process improvements, then your processes kind of, you see them remain as cumbersome as ever. And I think on the last point there's always added layers of bureaucracy as well that can cause process issues, and hinder projects and hinder kind of potential for improvements too. So
it's funny, actually, there's a point there that you made, Stuart, around kind of, there seems to be an acceptance of the status quo or the process as is. So when you come into those roles and you're kind of looking at kind of similar problems as you've moved through your career, where, lack of automation, manual processes, poor data flow, people must, in those roles where you've, and in those businesses where you've just joined, they must kind of somehow must recognize it themselves. So how do you help them to kind of move past, that that state they're in, to move to a better state, and maybe overcome some of that resistance to change? How do you enable that? Is it like, do you start at the management level to push a change initiative forward? Do you start with your colleagues to say, hey, look, if we did this, our data capture might be better, or our integration with our finance systems might be better? Where do you start with helping to overcome that acceptance of the status quo, and maybe overcome some resistance to change?
Yeah, I like to start by kind of getting a good understanding of that process fully. So what is it actually trying to achieve, I guess? And sometimes processes that people are performing can be that kind of like overcomplicated, that those involved in a process can kind of get wrapped up in tasks that provide no actual value. And they kind of get a little bit lost along the way, I guess, and not understanding fully what they're doing. So, and payroll can definitely be masters of that. So, really simple example, I guess, is somebody, I've seen people kind of check into a variance report and writing notes against kind of every single variance or something on the payroll to confirm that check's taken place. Because that's what we're supposed to do, isn't it? Kind of justify changes. But if you're checking a payroll that actually contains significant amounts of variable payments, then there's a lot of wasted effort there, because there's going to be variable payments. So it's kind of working with those performing the process to understand what it is they're trying to do. And then once you know what they're trying to do, so I guess in that instance, they're identifying errors and anomalies or something, you can start to then think about what would be considered an anomaly on that payroll, and just the way you actually give the person that report. So maybe they shouldn't be checking variables for a payment type that's variable. You'd be checking non-variances, for example, to kind of prevent a duplicate payment or something. So you can start to reduce that time that the process is spending checking by kind of changing the process and giving them better data to begin with. So then you're reducing the quantity of the output from the payroll, but you're reducing the quantity of the output, but you're improving the quality of the output. And maybe considering kind of, things like thresholds or something, and items that could be potentially duplicated. And then I think moving from that, if you're kind of going to go and make that change to that process, then is absolutely, you need to communicate that to all those involved in that process. So the person who's going to be performing it, the people above that who's going to be expecting the output, etc. So if we're changing something, you're communicating what you're changing, why, how's it going to change, document that change process so the user is able to kind of understand what the benefits are they're going to realize, I guess. And then last, of course, I guess, once your change is in place, you don't want to stop at that point. You want to kind of revisit that process. How's it working now? What benefits have we realized? But then actually, how are you going to further improve that? So, can you, those checks that you're performing now, could they have actually been performed before the data's even kind of got into the payroll system? For example, can you harness your payroll software to give you better insight into your anomalies? Or actually, is there a better solution that needs to be considered? Because technology for payroll and HR has moved on massively, I'd say in the last 10 years or so. And process improvements don't necessarily follow suit because people are very much, well, we've always done it this way, or if it's not broken, why fix it? That kind of thing. So like sometimes people are kind of thinking along them lines. So something that might not have been possible maybe a couple of years ago, something might actually be possible now due to kind of technology enhancements and that. So
good. And so I think it kind of takes me onto something when I hear you speak about, you know, the what's in it for me factor, you know, explaining the benefits to the different stakeholders, to your colleagues, to people up the chain that might be consuming that data, looking at the tools that you're using to say, look, can we get more out of the tools, pulling apart your process to make sure you fully understand why are we doing work like this. So you're on this kind of process improvement journey. And then I suppose what we recognize is, and we in organizations all of the time, people undergo kind of process fatigue. You know, there's a new initiative fatigue where, you know, there's this new way of doing whatever it is. It could be your performance, could be HR, could be new finance processes. The organization is constantly moving and refreshing itself. So how do you make those changes that you want? How do you make them sustain and kind of embed them into the organization to make sure that you know, the benefits that you spoke about actually happen?
Yeah, I think without a doubt, plan that change, outline that change, what it's kind of going to look at, but give consideration to the entire kind of end-to-end process and all of the relevant stakeholders involved in that process. So not just the part that perhaps realizes an immediate benefit for yourself or your team. Most times you tend to find that the improvement requires multiple stakeholders across departments to kind of collaborate and to understand the full impact and also be able to change what is delivered to be able to proceed. So whether this is a kind of payroll process input or an output, any changes kind of need to be communicated and considered to ensure the maximum impact and success, really. And I think the other thing that's important and something I've kind of like honestly fell down on in the past is kind of thinking about the art of the possible too. So solving a problem such as making a process more leaner or more cost effective or improving time is great, but giving thought to that kind of bigger picture and what your improvements could eventually lead on to can give you a lot more improvement. So for example, when we look to the market to find a suitable system for global data consolidation, perhaps back then I didn't give enough consideration into what that system could kind of grow to become. And as a result, that process has perhaps took a little longer to come to fruition as we didn't kind of consider the bigger picture all round from the outset. So
that's interesting. Oh, sorry, you're going to. Sorry, Stuart, I kind of cut you off there. Were you going to follow up with something?
No. I was just, as I say, it's funny looking back at kind of how we set out with our project for this global tool. Is the kind of, we were more concerned about the kind of being able to capture the costs initially and not thinking about the long game, where actually this system has kind of become more integrated into the business and become the main system, if you like, for gathering that payroll data from. So
that's interesting. We might get into that in a moment on the tool side of things, Stuart. We might come back to that. I had a question before we kind of got there, though, and you know, just around the process improvement, change, bringing people, tools, process, and data together. When you've taken up these new roles, did you have a particular vision in mind for the payroll function and what it could achieve?
I guess I just want to make life easier for my team and myself, right?
Yeah.
But also to be kind of, obviously, I've got an outward look of kind of delivering what the business needs. And that's going to kind of be, you know, as timely as possible and as securely as possible with kind of minimum impact to the team overall. So the best way in my mind is obviously having the right products available to us. That gives us the ability to be kind of responsive to the business needs then. And better still, rather than being responsive to the business needs, if we can look at kind of being proactively providing that information or that data to what people need rather than being asked to. So kind of like looking into things like automation here, and that's obviously something that's in consideration too. So
no, it's interesting when you talk about the automation point, because one of the things I'm particularly interested in is, just talking about the future, right? So we know automation is going to change how lots of people work, and some people might fear that, and some people might embrace that. If I was thinking about automation, and if I was thinking about the amount of effort that goes into things like, checking data, making, like, obviously the accuracy of payroll is paramount. But there has to be benefits there, to move people from this kind of transactional payroll processing into this more value add. Because I want to bring this back now to kind of the topic of how do we become more influential given the data we have. So when you're looking at your team, you did mention that topic of automation. Can you see how your team starts to benefit over time by putting better tooling and automation in place, so that they can now start to add some different value add to the business through their work?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you touched on a really key point there, is that people do have this fear of automation, and we're all going to lose our jobs, etc. And again, going back in my career, I've kind of worked in factories and manufacturing in the past, and seen these kind of time and motion guys appear, and everyone's like, oh, they're going to bring a robot in, we're all losing roles. So it's very important to kind of stress that automation is often designed to kind of simplify and get rid of the non-value add activity, I guess, of the manual, repetitive kind of processes,
or work we're not really interested in doing.
Yeah, exactly. And once that's out of the way, and you can get your systems in place, and that automation is in place, and everything is kind of standardized, which I guess we'll touch on separately about the kind of standardization issue. But once you're at that stage, then you're kind of freeing up your team to kind of perform those more value adding activities, or to actually sit back and kind of look at the processes, because the minds are not kind of full with all these manual tasks that they've got to perform. They can kind of sit back and actually look at the bigger picture then, and kind of move on and say, actually, what's our next steps? Where are we going to move to? So yeah, absolutely. One of the tagline that we're trying to say about automation is it's freeing up your users to kind of perform that more value-adding activities.
Well, certainly, I think the business that you're from, so Blue Prism, one of the global leaders in robotic process automation. You're helping businesses all over the world to, take away maybe some of those more transactional kind of tasks, so that people can then, maybe derive insights rather than being, busy processing. We have time maybe to step back and think a little bit, and add some gray matter to the problems in front of us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of the attractions for me joining the company as well. It's something that's always been high on my agenda, is making that process that simple that, you're not spending so much time, and you can just press a button and kind of do it for you. So it's always been like interesting to do that. And you just got to kind of get your data or get your processes in that kind of standard order before you kind of commence that journey, because you want to make your automation process as simple as possible as well.
So if I was to say to you, look, if you're approaching a greenfield site now, and if we think about the different kinds of payroll data we're looking at, we have gathering our payroll changes together. And we all know that's a big challenge, right? Because we know payroll data is scattered in a host of different systems and tools within the organization. So your HR system, absolutely, you'll have some of it. But depending on the benefits that you give to your employees, well, you could have local benefit carriers that'll give you some sort of an output based on benefit premiums they've elected to. You could have certain members of staff that participate in equity schemes, etc. So there's lots of payroll change data scattered around the place. Then, of course, you want to get data back once payroll has been processed. So your payroll gross to net, or your payroll output data. And then you'll also be generating data about your process over the top of it. So, your KPIs and your performance. So the question, I suppose, where if we set the scene like that, if you're moving into a greenfield area and you're saying, look, I want to bring some of my experience here. I want to start somewhere. Where would you start? Would you start with sorting out the payroll change data? Would you start at trying to aggregate your global payroll gross to net information, so you can start to drive insight from that, or you start looking at your KPI data? Where it should be naturally inclined, Stuart?
Again, from the start of the process, again, I think, so I touched just on the last question on standardization. And I'd be standardizing kind of, first of all, the way in which your data is kind of gathered and prepared. So ensuring you know kind of where your key inputs are coming from that payroll, and then being able to kind of consolidate that data and standardize that into a concise format. Yeah. And then from that point, once you have that kind of, doesn't matter what's coming in, but you've kind of got this block of data that's ready to then kind of move onwards, whether that payroll is, whether that data is going into an in-house system or it's going to an outsourced provider kind of thing. Whether your payrolls are, monthly, bi-monthly, etc. And then once you've kind of got that solid block of data and you know that the same kind of inputs are going into the same systems, then you can start to consider other aspects of the system, such as what you're outputting, what you sign off, what you kind of, you check in and your variances, etc. And then kind of moving on to kind of, I think my predominant thing is I want to kind of get people kind of paid accurately and on time, first of all. So I want to get my data in correctly and accurately and processed through as possible. The benefit to the business after that, of course, is the kind of the insights they can gain from your data and the onward transmission of your data as well. So where is your data going afterwards? It's going into finance systems, it's going to banks, etc. So definitely focus on getting my key data right, because I want my employees paying accurately. From the back end and from the business perspective is what comes out of the payroll afterwards. So, and then in terms of KPIs, I mean, I guess I admit I've not been as strongly focused on KPIs from a client provider perspective, because my focus has always been kind of, I want these employees paid. In terms of KPIs, I mean, yeah, I'd like to work with better, to get better information in more accurately and on time. And I'd like the payrolls to be kind of returned when I'm expecting them to come back, rather than, a couple of days after kind of thing. But my focus has always been, I want them people kind of paid. So.
Sure. Well, I suppose that's what you get paid to do.
Yeah, so exactly.
So I suppose we've kind of established, keep house, get your data flows in order, and then from there you can start leveraging some influence. So you started to bring in some other systems that start to use that data. So if we kind of think about if let's say you've straightened out your process, you understand your data flows, you've brought people along in your team, with this process improvement or process change, let's start to turn our attention now to, our processes are in, they're starting to mature, people are adopting them, and let's look at this topic of influence then. So armed with better tools and processes and supportive colleagues, do you think you can get to a more influential spot in the organization with that, and how does the organization benefit from it?
Yeah, I think absolutely can do. So I mean, I think we've got to look at where payroll kind of typically or tends to sit in a business, and that's usually as part of a kind of a finance service or a HR kind of shared service. So often we don't kind of have that kind of head of department, and we're not kind of in a, that we don't have that kind of the CFO's eye ear, for example. So it's really important to kind of get buy-in, I think, from your heads of department to understand, that they can come to payroll, and payroll are the source that they should be coming to kind of get that clear and accurate data. So, yeah, I think that our payroll team has kind of grown in influence in the organization, because they're aware now that they can come to us, they can approach payroll and get that accurate data from us. They can get insights into the business, and it all depends on their focus as well. So their focus might be on a region or a particular pay group or a set of countries or something. But ultimately, we're able to now supply our HR function, reward, finance controllers, execs, auditors with accurate and relevant data to support their requirements. And we know that data is accurate, and that supports better business decisions. And gives more timely business decisions instead as well. So they're not kind of waiting around for you to pull together various sources of data. You can kind of give it at your fingertips. I think in terms of influence to the business, it's the business having that assurance that the accuracy of information's there, it's maintained, it's available. And whilst payroll are not the key decision makers, we can certainly enable the business to make them decisions in a better kind of time frame than before. So
yeah, you touch on it. You touch on a very important point. It's one of the things that I'm always amazed by is that, you know, payroll data is the most accurate data of the organization. You know, I keep making this point. It represents up to 70% of the cost base of a business, and a lot of organizations struggle to pull it together. And as you say, you know, when the business can reliably, like business heads, C-suite, regional teams can rely on the data that the payroll team are providing, they can rely on it. And that means that they're sure in their decisions and data-driven decisions, because you know what you're giving them is accurate and timely and right. So I'm often amazed by, you know, how, you know, payroll teams sitting on this crock of gold, but being somewhat hampered by being more influential because they don't have the right tools and processes in place to support the business. Because ultimately, I think what you're describing the situation is, as you say, you're enabling business decisions, but they're coming to you. You become then this focus point for that insight that they need about the business.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of data that we kind of produce now for the rest of the business is kind of growing and growing. Where initially, I would say that people weren't coming to the department because they kind of weren't aware, but now, you know, I give you some examples. We've got quite a kind of, we have a really complex reporting structure within the business, and trying to allocate costs to the right areas and everything. In the past, it just simply wasn't possible without, you know, a lot of manual adjustments. So now we're able to kind of produce standardized journals globally, with 5 different layers of organizational complexity to feed our finance systems. And we support requests from our tax teams into like research and development spend, our reward team to monitor things like gender pay gap reporting, total compensation, our heads of departments to support their overall staffing costs. A key one for us was kind of with auditors, we're able to kind of demonstrate our Sarbanes-Oxley compliance and have the ability to demonstrate where data's flowed into payroll from all the different sources and kind of how the data's kind of moved on. Yeah, reconciliations for year ends, stock vesting data, finance accruals. The list is absolutely endless. The requests, and we don't really envisage that going away anytime soon. So to, like you say, sat on that kind of pot of gold, if you like. For
and has it been easy for you to pull that together?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't. You know, we're in a much better position nowadays to provide that data. As the difficulties in the past were always kind of, you know, you're dealing with global company, you're dealing with like intricacies. So, you know, getting salary data or something for the UK might be, all right, is it salary or is it hourly pay? But then when you move out to, say, like India or something, that pay is kind of comprised of 5 or 6 different components. And before you know it, across a couple of countries, you might have 20 different kind of pieces of data to kind of piece together just what somebody's salary is. And the other difficulty, of course, is, you know, exchange rates. So how do you get meaningful data from items of data that are kind of sat in different currencies? So be able to pocket that together in a system, apply an exchange rate so you can actually visualize your data like for like is absolutely paramount.
Oh, I'm going to try and shamelessly plug something here. So Stuart, do you mind mentioning how you've pulled that together?
Yeah, so we use a product that we purchased from Payzaar a couple of years ago. So we use the global reporting tool, and we've been able to kind of plug all of our data in for all of our kind of different countries, etc., and be able to align that data to enable the kind of better reporting that comes from it, and things like I just discussed about exchange rates, etc. Now, it was having that consolidation tool available to you, and I think I touched earlier on, didn't perhaps see the full picture from the outset, but what that system is now allowing us to do is to kind of produce these really complex journals for the rest of the business. And, you know, our payroll data is all sourced into one place and kind of feeds out from Payzaar. So it's been absolutely instrumental in everything that kind of our payroll team's done.
I think it's great to hear, but it's only one part of that change agenda you have. You know, get your processes right, get your people aligned, and then find tools that can help you make that change, that change initiative. So so no, I think it forms part of the picture, but it is only part of the picture. I tell you, I'm gonna finish up on one question, and I think this is kind of future focused, and maybe for some of the people that are on the webinar now, and it's just thinking about people that are, maybe in a payroll role, thinking about their careers, thinking about how they could have a greater impact or influence on the organization. What sort of skills and what sort of mindset would you encourage people to adopt? And would any data skills feature on that list, Stuart?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, I'm going to say it again. So I'm plugging the same line, aren't I? The key requirement of payroll is always going to be, we're going to pay employees accurately. We're going to get them paid on time. But of course, none of these are going to be achieved without having that accurate flow of data into payroll in the first instance, getting that data timely and be comfortable that it's correct. Of course, the initial input has to be correct, but it relies heavily on payroll to be able to kind of set that up, verify that data, analyze it, and question anything out of place prior to the payroll being approved and transmitted to employees' accounts. So strong analytical skills and the ability to kind of challenge and question are key requirements. Going back to a point I made earlier in my career, absolutely be prepared to challenge the status quo in payroll, because just because it's how it's always been done doesn't mean to say it's the best way to be done. So challenging, analytical, mindset.
Yeah, super. Listen, Stuart, thanks a million for your time today. It's been really insightful. I have a question which might help us transition to the next part of the webinar. It's from Rahul. So thanks, Rahul, for sending in the question. So it's a multi-parter, Stuart. So how do you consolidate the reporting to make data meaningful, as well as to save time in manually consolidating the data in Excel? So basically, it's how do you pull the data together quickly, even when so some examples: getting consolidated data by employees for things like paid time off, for month-end accruals across multiple locations. So it's how do you consolidate all of this data in a timely fashion? And then once you have it, can you slice and dice that data to give you things like paid time off accruals?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything's kind of, I guess we're lucky in the systems that we kind of have in place now that we can do that. So we can pull data in from different sources. And when we plug that data into our system, then we've kind of, there's mapping involved. So you're going to get your commissions in, for example, and then that commission is going to kind of map into various different commissions in the system, but ultimately it all sits under the commission. When we have new starters, so we have new starter information kind of feeds directly through from our HR system. And along with that is certain kind of accruals we'll kind of start to calculate in the background, and we'll record that, which finance obviously are really interested in kind of accruing costs. So it's all about kind of plugging all that data into the one place to kind of record that and getting that standardized kind of template that I was discussing earlier on. So,
well, thanks for that, Stuart. What we might do is we might actually show Rahul how you might pull that together, because my colleague Jennifer Keane is going to show us the Payzaar reporting suite, and it might help further illustrate the points you're making there, Stuart. So over to you, Jen.
Hey, folks. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Stuart. Actually, Sam, if you could just tweak the permissions there so I can share my screen. Stuart was talking about the sort of the mapping and the consolidation of the data. And to Rahul's question, when you have all of that data kind of mapped and consolidated, this is the kind of view that you can be looking at when you have all of that data. And yes, there's a lot of challenges with mapping that data, especially if we consider where some of the systems are going to start. We're talking about things coming out of notebooks and manual steps. There's the ways to go to get to here, but when you can get to here, this is the kind of view that you can start looking at. So when you can get all of your data mapped and loaded into Payzaar, this is the kind of view that you can get. You can drill down here, filter by things like region and entity. You can do things like turn on and off your areas, and you'll see here your graphs will re-render. So just turn that back on and re-render our graph here. And we'll just deep dive into gross pay here for a moment. When we look here, we'll be able to see that you're able to do things like view the payroll cost trend over time. And what's really nice here is, in addition to the gross pay, you're able to see the employer contribution highlighted separately, which is pretty important, because if I scroll down here to the payroll costs by country, we also able to see the employer contribution highlighted. And as I'm sure most of the people on the call will know, obviously that can vary country to country. And I know that also kind of picks up on a point that Stuart was talking about earlier about how different that can be and how difficult that can be, of course, consolidating that across different locations when you're trying to get all of those different reports, when things vary country to country, different localities, the way different payrolls are aggregated, when different pay elements come together, when different pay elements are composed of many different pay elements. So when you have these pay periods side by side and the different countries side by side, you can also see, for example, how the differing employer contributions stack up. This could be pretty useful if you're trying to compare for staffing location decisions as well. So it's pretty neat to be able to see country by country how these stack up. You can even drill down on a pay element. So let's have a little look here across, and for example, let's explore bonus. So we can see there's a pretty big change here, period to period. And we can click and drill down. Let's, for example, consider that there might have been some sort of cost containment exercise here. That there might have been a cost containment instruction. We need to cut costs this period. You can drill right down and see how this has played out this period. In New Zealand here, there were fewer bonuses paid this period, and we can see the immediate impact on the payroll this period. We can see that this exercise has been successful last period, and this period there's an immediate impact, and you're able to see that for every pay element across the payroll. And something that hopefully you'll maybe have spotted as I've been navigating around here is that there are these little export icons. So whenever there's data here, you're also able to export it to Excel in case you need to send that report somewhere else, or you just want to play around with the data a little bit more. So I want to jump briefly back up to Germany here and export or expand this tab here. So something that I didn't know, although I do speak a very limited amount of German, is that the word for salary in German is Gehalt. What's kind of interesting is that when you import these local pay, when you import your gross to nets here, we maintain the local pay elements. Those are imported and we maintain those local pay elements, but they're mapped to these globally understood tags. So none of that data is lost, but they're aggregated up to this globally understood element. And this kind of speaks a little bit again to what Stuart was talking about earlier, when you're trying to get this global level understanding of complex, differing local payrolls that are composed again of these differing complex local payroll elements. So even though we might not have an understanding of what these payroll elements are in this local pay group, they're all mapped up to gross pay, so that when we look at it at this global aggregation level, it's all understood and we can understand it from a payroll cost trend, which is pretty neat. And again, we have our ability to export it here if we need to look at that report in another format or send that report somewhere else. So that's pretty cool. I do just also want to briefly touch on this page here and the people dashboard. It's a nice addition to whatever HR system of records you might have. It gives you some additional information, for example, on things like your joiners and leavers and payroll headcount per country, the countries in which your people are being paid. I know we've talked a lot about, for example, the importance of the accuracy of payroll and how important it is that data is accurate. I know, for example, an anecdote that gets spoken about a lot and has been touched on a lot today is how accurate the payroll data is. And I know it's very important that it's accurate, and why it's important that it's accurate, because I know I personally am always very keen to have my payroll be very accurate. So it's very important that payroll is accurate, because every employee is always very vested in having their payroll be accurate. So it's nice to have this addition to your HR data system here, just to sort of back up the accuracy of that data, to say, yep, this is our payroll headcount by country, and this should match that data. Again, just nice and easy and straightforward to use. So these are nice, kind of cool graphs. These will answer a lot of questions about that kind of consolidated data overview. And this is, you can drill down quite far, and this will probably answer a lot of questions that you'll have. But if we kind of need to answer more maybe complex or different questions, or if you need to ask different questions of your data, we also have something called Data Analyzer. So this will allow you to, using the same data that's in the reports on the payroll dashboard, to just ask slightly different questions of that data. So using a graphical tool, you'll be able to build custom reports of, using that same data, you'll be able to build custom reports to analyze different things. So this is a Brazil bonus query that I've built here, and it just examines bonuses in Brazil for a custom period. So I'm just going to click back through and show you how I've put that together. Using a really simple click-through interface, all I've done is put together a report that, for example, looks at employees, although I could have chosen pay groups, countries, or regions. Looks at data that I've chosen here, in this case, bonus, although I could have chosen any of these other fields from the gross to net. And if I'd wanted to, I could have added a condition here. If we think back to my earlier comments about, for example, that kind of cost element, that kind of cost curtailment exercise, we might, for example, want to create a report where we only analyze bonuses over a certain amount. We could have added this in here. And although I've run this report for a custom time period, we could have run it for maybe just 3 months or 12 months or a specific time period. And what that allows you to do is, as I said, ask kind of custom questions of your data. So it's the same data that we've looked at in those dashboards, but it just allows you to ask more specific questions. And it comes back to that kind of point about like proactively providing for the business needs. So maybe there's a question that's not quite answered by our pre-built graphs. Maybe there's a question that you think is going to come up. It's about proactively kind of providing for those questions. So the dashboards kind of give you pretty good visibility, really great visibility of your operational data. But by importing your data, you don't just get that visibility. You also have the ability to get it back out then into your financial system at your period end to load it back into your payroll for your GL entries. So by using that same data then that we've been exploring, that you've already loaded, we can map your chart of accounts. We can run you a custom built journal entry report that you can output into your finance system. So then we have a nice GL report here, nicely balanced GL report that you can output to your finance system. So look, when we started talking at the start of this webinar, we were talking about the importance of data, the importance of consolidated data, and the importance of that accurate consolidated data, and how it was going to be important to be able to use that to inform and influence decisions in order to be at the heart of things. And hopefully what we've shown is that this kind of system, this is the system that Stuart is using, is something that people can use to really sit and be at the heart of this important conversation and this important connection between HR and finance. This is something that you can use to be asking and answering those questions and be influencing those decisions. Thanks very much. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Trevor, for any questions.
Super. Thanks a million, Jen, for that. There's a number of questions in. So one in from Francis, and a couple of these are direct. We've been requested to ask for some answers from you, Stuart. So hopefully you're still with us and ready. So the first one from Francis is, as someone who isn't leading the team, how would you encourage the appetite to look for improvements and not get hung up on practicing skills during the processing of payroll? So I think really leveraging your experience here in change and process improvement.
Yeah, I guess it's like I said earlier on, isn't it? So sometimes people can be blinded by the process and not actually take that time to look back. So I've always been very kind of committed with my team to kind of saying to them, you know, we can make any process that we're performing easier and better. So go tell me what we're kind of doing wrong, because I'm not saying I am, you know, 100%. I've not seen everything, and I'm not convinced that absolutely everything we ever do is the best way of doing it. So I encourage the team to kind of challenge, and I guess that the team knowing that you kind of listen to them really helps in that aspect. So we'll have regular, you know, conversations around how processes are moving and how we can improve them. And yeah, the team get motivated when they kind of see you acting upon those changes. So kind of, you know, actively getting involved then and kind of saying, okay, that's great, let's go, let's look for how we can change that process to make it work better. So yeah, just getting them, I guess they've got to be motivated, haven't they, in the role to kind of do that. And if they can see that there's going to be an improvement that eventually leads to them having to waste less time, then they're going to be all up for it.
Super. Thanks, Stuart. Next one again from Francis. When you're creating reports, have you used any specific tools, and how much have you used things like Power Query or Excel to automate processes, or would you go a different direction?
I am like an avid user of Excel, so I put my data in using Excel templates. I kind of export my data into Excel, and undoubtedly there's some level of manipulation kind of carries on afterwards, just to kind of tidy up that formatting or something, or just to kind of make it, you know, if I haven't quite hit the nail on the head with the report out the system, then we need to do some adjustments. So I don't use Power Query. I kind of tend to use a little bit of macros in the background and stuff, but that's just my personal choice and the kind of way I've done it. Absolutely, there's better ways of kind of harnessing. So some of the part of the products that Payzaar kind of offer, I guess, is kind of, there's a whole kind of HR Connect system, which Trevor can talk about separately, but they can do the kind of stuff that my macros and everything were kind of doing for me all along. So actually data can just be kind of plugged into the system much sooner than how I get them in the system. So yeah, I still do use Excel. It's not going away from me anytime soon, but what comes out of the system, I'm not having to kind of plug sheets and sheets of data together to kind of get there. I'm pulling it from the system first. So
okay. So what you're using is you're using Payzaar to help you collect and organize your data. You're using the Payzaar reporting to put that out, but you're also then when you're also pushing that information, allowing users to self-serve using Payzaar. So once you have the data in there, you're pushing that out to members of the finance team and senior leadership team to be able to query and navigate and answer some of their own questions even before they come to you looking for something.
Yeah, I mean, we've got controls in place, so we're not kind of just saying it's a free for all. You get in there and get what you want out of it. Kind of very like kind of aware of what people's access rights are, etc., and all of that can kind of be controlled within the system. So we can say who has access to what data to go and grab it themselves. But yeah, if you've got users in the business, can also go into that system and access what they need. Yeah.
Super. Okay, so I think that's it in terms of the questions we have. If there's any other questions, we'll, now's your chance. If not, we'll draw a close to the webinar. I don't see anything else popping up in the Q&A or on the chat. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Special thanks to Stuart for his time and insight and sharing his experience with us. Jen for giving you a brief look at just a part of the overall Payzaar solution for global payroll. We've recorded the session today, so our team will share the recording with you. So if any of your colleagues want to see that or have an interest in it, that'll be made available. And I'd like to just say for myself, it's been a pleasure to host this afternoon. And I wish everyone a good evening and continued success in their global payroll roles. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Thanks, Trevor. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.